The steel doors slammed shut behind him. Steven Seagal stepped into the prison yard. No cameras, no bodyguards. No black belt around his waist. Just a gray jumpsuit with the number 4782 stamped across the back and silence. The kind of silence that screams danger. Inmates turned their heads slowly, one by one, eyes scanning him from head to toe. Whispers started rippling through the yard like poison. Who's the old man? Look at his ponytail. Think he's somebody. Probably some washed-up actor. One inmate leaned against the fence and laughed loud enough for everyone to hear. Doesn't matter who you were out there, Grandpa. He spit on the ground. In here, you're nobody? Steven said nothing. His face didn't change. No anger, no fear, no reaction. He just walked steadily across the concrete yard, boots scraping the ground, heading toward the far corner where a single metal bench sat empty. He sat down, crossed his arms, and watched. What they didn't know was this. They had just dismissed one of the most dangerous men alive, a man who trained Navy SEALs in hand-to-hand combat. A man who held a 7th-degree black belt in Aikido. A man who spent decades mastering the art of control, precision, and lethal force. A man who never needed to prove anything. Until now. What would you do if everyone around you thought you were weak? The sun beat down on the yard. Guards stood in towers above, watching but not caring. Inmates circled like sharks sensing blood in the water. Steven's eyes moved calmly across the scene. He'd been in worse places. War zones, back alleys in foreign countries, surrounded by armed enemies. But here was different. Because in prison, respect wasn't earned with words. It was taken with fists. And they were already deciding when to take his. One inmate nudged another and pointed at Steven. Think he'll last the week? Old guy like that. 3 days tops. They laughed, but Steven didn't move. He just sat there, calm, still, waiting. Because he knew something they didn't. Violence was coming. It always did in places like this. And when it arrived, they'd learn the difference between a man who talks about being dangerous and a man who simply is. Have you ever been underestimated just because of how you looked? Steven wasn't supposed to be here. None of this was supposed to happen. 2 weeks earlier, he was living his normal life, teaching a self-defense seminar in Los Angeles. A packed room, students eager to learn, cameras recording every move. That was his routine. That was his world. Then everything changed. The charges came out of nowhere. Assault allegations, financial fraud, breach of contract, all tied to a business partner named Marcus Devine, a man Steven had trusted for 5 years. A man who turned out to be a snake. Marcus wanted control of their security training company, worth millions. When Steven refused to sell his share, Marcus got creative. He fabricated documents, paid off witnesses, hired lawyers who knew how to manipulate the system. Within days, Steven was arrested. The media had a field day. Action star faces serious criminal charges. Steven Seagal's dark side exposed. Hollywood tough guy arrested. Headlines everywhere. His reputation torn apart in 72 hours. The evidence was fake, but it looked real. Real enough for a judge to deny bail. Real enough to send him to maximum security. 30 days minimum, pending trial. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Rebecca Ordaz, promised to fight. We'll get you out, Steven. Just hold on. But until then, he was alone, surrounded by criminals, men who didn't care about black belts or movie credits. Have you ever been falsely accused of something you didn't do? Inside the prison, life had its own rules, its own hierarchy, its own brutal logic. At the very top sat a man named Vince, the Reaper, Calloway, 6'4", 280 pounds of muscle and menace. Former enforcer for the Iron Cross gang on the outside. Inside these walls, he was a king. Vince controlled everything that mattered. The commissary who got extra food, cigarettes, soap. Protection who stayed safe, who got hurt. Respect who mattered, who didn't. His word was absolute law. Cross him and you'd wake up in the infirmary. Or worse. Steven noticed it all on his second day. The way inmates moved around Vince. The way they lowered their eyes when he walked past. The way guards looked the other way when Vince's crew handled business. It was a kingdom built on fear, and Vince didn't like quiet guys who kept to themselves. Guys who didn't ask permission. Guys who didn't bow. Steven also noticed the stares. During meals, inmates would position themselves near him, watching, measuring, circling like predators testing new prey. He'd seen this behavior before. In dojos when a new student walked in. In street fights when a gang sized up a stranger. In war zones when enemies decided if you were a threat. It was the dance before violence. The calm before the storm. But Steven didn't react. He ate his meals slowly. Kept his face neutral. His movements controlled. He watched everything but revealed nothing. Have you ever had to stay silent even when you wanted to speak up? On day 3, an inmate approached him in the cafeteria, Skinny guy. Tattoos crawling up his neck, eyes that darted around nervously. "You got someone on the outside sending you money?" he asked. Steven looked up from his tray. "No." The man's smile was thin and fake. "Then you're gonna need friends in here, old man." Steven took a slow bite of his bread, chewed, swallowed. "I'm fine." The smile vanished instantly. The man leaned closer. "You sure about that? Because things can get real ugly for guys who don't have protection." Steven's eyes locked onto his, calm, steady, unflinching. "I'm sure." For a moment, the man just stared. Then he straightened up, shook his head, and walked away. But the message was crystal clear. Protection wasn't optional here. It wasn't a choice. It was demanded. Pay up, or pay in blood. Steven understood the system. He'd studied power dynamics his whole life. How bullies operate. How fear spreads. How control is maintained. This was just another version of the same game. Different setting. Same rules. Would you stand your ground or play along to survive? That night, lying on his thin mattress, Steven thought about his daughter, his students, his life outside these walls. He thought about Marcus, the man who put him here. Rage would have been easy. But Steven had learned long ago that rage was a weakness. Control was strength. Patience was power, so he waited, watched, prepared. Because he knew what was coming. Men like Vince didn't ignore men like Steven. Eventually, they'd test him, push him, try to break him. And when that moment came, Steven would be ready. Day 5 arrived. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Everyone could feel it. The calm was ending. The storm was here. During recreation time, Steven walked into the yard like always, steady steps, calm face, no hesitation. He found an empty spot near the corner, away from the crowds, away from the noise. He dropped down and started doing push-ups, slow, controlled, focused, each rep perfectly measured, his breathing steady and rhythmic. This was his meditation, his way of staying centered in chaos. But the peace didn't last long. 3 inmates walked over, their boots crunching deliberately on the concrete, making sure he heard them coming. One of them, a stocky man with a shaved head and a scar across his cheek, kicked dirt near Steven's hands. Dust scattered across the ground. "You deaf, old man." Steven finished his push-up, rose to his feet slowly, brushed the dirt off his hands with calm, deliberate movements. "I heard you," he said quietly. The man stepped closer, invading Steven's space. His breath smelled like cheap coffee and cigarettes. "Then you know you owe Vince a tax." "Everyone does, that's how things work here." Steven looked at him directly, eye to eye. No blinking. No backing down. "I don't owe anyone anything." Laughter erupted from all 3 men, loud, mocking laughter that echoed across the yard. Other inmates started turning their heads, sensing drama, sensing blood. "You think you're special." The scarred man sneered. Steven's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "No. I just don't pay for respect I haven't received." The man's face twisted with anger, his hands balled into fists. "You're about to receive something, all right." A crowd began forming. Slowly at first, then faster. Inmates abandoning their workouts, their conversations, their card games. All eyes turned toward the confrontation. This was entertainment. This was the gladiator arena. And they all wanted front row seats. Have you ever stood up for yourself when everyone expected you to back down? Guards stood in their towers above, watching through binoculars, but they didn't move, didn't intervene. This was how things worked in here. Let the inmates handle their own problems. Unless blood was spilled, unless someone died, they stayed back and watched. The scarred man stepped even closer, so close their chests almost touched. He shoved Steven's shoulder hard. "What are you gonna do, Grandpa? Karate chop me?" More laughter from the crowd. Someone shouted, "Break him, Ricky!" Another yelled, "Make him cry!" Steven's expression didn't change. His body didn't tense. He simply looked at the man called Ricky with those steady, calm eyes. "Walk away," Steven said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but somehow everyone heard it. Ricky's face flushed red with rage. "Or what?" he spat. Steven's eyes locked onto his, unblinking, unwavering. "Or you'll wish you had." For a split second, something flickered in Ricky's eyes. Doubt, fear, uncertainty. But pride is a powerful drug, and in front of 50 witnesses, backing down wasn't an option. Ricky swung. Fast, wild, aggressive. A right hook aimed straight at Steven's jaw, the kind of punch that could break bones. But Steven moved. Not away from the punch, into it. He redirected Ricky's arm with one hand, a simple, fluid motion, like water flowing around a rock. He stepped to the side, used Ricky's own momentum against him, and sent him crashing face, first into the concrete. Hard. The sound echoed across the yard. A sickening crunch of flesh meeting stone. It happened in less than 2 seconds. Maybe 1.5. Silence fell like a hammer. Absolute, complete, suffocating silence. Ricky groaned on the ground. Blood dripped from his nose, pooling on the gray concrete. His two friends stood frozen, mouths open, eyes wide, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Steven stood over Ricky, not aggressive, not celebrating, just standing there, like nothing had happened. "I gave you a choice," he said softly. No one moved, no one breathed. The other two inmates slowly backed away, hands raised slightly. Universal sign of surrender. Steven turned and walked away. No hurry, no drama, just steady, controlled steps back to his corner. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. No one dared get in his way. Ricky remained on the ground, groaning and bleeding. Eventually, two of his friends helped him up and dragged him away. But the message had been sent, received, understood. Should he have stayed quiet, or was this the only way to earn respect? That night, the prison felt different. Heavier, darker, word spread fast in a place like this. By dinner time, everyone knew what happened. The old man in the gray jumpsuit, the quiet one who kept to himself. He'd dropped Ricky, the bull, Martinez, in under 2 seconds. Ricky, who'd put 3 men in the hospital last year. Ricky, who was Vince's enforcer. Ricky, who never lost a fight, until today. In the corner of the common area, Vince called a meeting. His crew gathered around him like soldiers reporting to their general. 7 men. All loyal, all dangerous, all angry. Steven's name was mentioned 12 times in 10 minutes. Who does this guy think he is? He embarrassed us in front of everyone. Ricky's face is a mess. Broken nose, busted lip. We can't let this slide, boss. We need to make an example out of him. Vince sat back in his metal chair, arms crossed over his massive chest, fingers tapping slowly on the armrest. His face was stone, but his mind was racing. This wasn't just about Ricky anymore. This was about respect, about control, about maintaining the power structure he'd built over 5 years. If one old man could disrespect him without consequences, others would follow. The kingdom would crumble. "Find out who he is," Vince said finally. His voice was low and cold. "I want to know everything." One of his guys, a skinny kid named Thomas who knew how to work computers, nodded. "I'm on it, boss." An hour later, Thomas returned. He was holding a printed page from the prison library computer. His hands were shaking slightly, his face pale. "Boss, you're not gonna believe this." Vince grabbed the paper from his hands. His eyes scanned the text, then stopped, his jaw clenched. His eyebrows furrowed. "Steven Seagal," he read aloud. The room went silent.
"Yeah,"
Thomas said nervously. "The actor." "But he's not just an actor, boss." Thomas pointed at the screen printout. "Martial artist, 7th degree black belt in Aikido, trained law enforcement, military personnel. He's got his own fighting system. He's worked with Navy SEALs, DA agents, CI operatives. I can read." Vince snapped, but his voice had changed, less confident, more uncertain. He stared at Steven's photo on the page. The same calm face he'd seen in the yard, the same steady eyes, and nobody knew. Vince asked quietly. Thomas shook his head. He didn't say anything, just kept his head down, stayed quiet. Another crew member, a heavily tattooed man named Cruz, spoke up. "Don't matter who he was on the outside, boss. In here, he's just another inmate." Vince crumpled the paper slowly in his fist. "Yeah," he said. But his voice lacked conviction, because Vince had heard the stories. Everyone had. Steven Seagal wasn't just some Hollywood fake who did movie stunts. He was the real deal, a legitimate warrior, someone who'd spent 40 years mastering combat. And Vince had just made him an enemy. Would knowing someone's past change how you treat them? Across the prison in his cell, Steven sat on his bunk, legs crossed, hands resting on his knees, eyes closed, meditating. He wasn't worried. He'd been in worse situations than this, outnumbered in back alleys in Japan, surrounded in foreign war zones where one wrong move meant death, targeted by people far more dangerous than prison gangs, drug cartels, corrupt government officials, trained assassins. This was just another test, another obstacle, another opportunity to practice what he'd preached his entire life: control, discipline, awareness. But he also knew something they didn't. Respect in places like this wasn't earned by talking. It wasn't earned by reputation. It was earned by action, by how you handled pressure, by how you responded when violence came knocking. And soon they'd force his hand again. He could feel it, the energy shifting, the tension building. Vince wouldn't let this go. Men like him couldn't. Their entire identity was built on dominance, on never backing down, on crushing anyone who challenged their authority. Steven opened his eyes, stared at the gray concrete wall in front of him. "Let them come," he whispered to himself. "Have you ever had to prove yourself even when you didn't want to?" Outside his cell, footsteps echoed in the hallway, guards making their rounds, inmates talking in hushed tones. Someone laughed, someone else cursed, the normal sounds of prison life. But underneath it all, a current of violence waiting to explode. Steven laid back on his bunk, arms behind his head, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring what it brought. He'd be ready. He was always ready. Because being ready wasn't about being aggressive. It was about being aware, alert, prepared for anything. And when the storm finally hit, when Vince and his crew made their move, Steven would show them the difference between a fighter and a master. Between someone who knew how to hurt people and someone who knew when. Do you think Steven should strike first or wait for them to come? Day 8. The morning started like any other. Breakfast bell rang at 6 a.m. sharp. Inmates shuffled into the cafeteria, trays clattering, voices mumbling. The same routine, the same gray walls, the same tasteless food, but something felt different today. Steven sensed it the moment he walked in. The air was electric, charged with anticipation. Guards were stationed differently, more of them than usual, and they weren't looking bored like they normally did. They were alert, watching, waiting. During breakfast, the warden's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Attention all inmates. Lockdown has been lifted early due to good behavior. Inmates looked at each other, confused. Good behavior. In a maximum security prison. That never happened. Yard time will be extended today. 2 hours instead of 1. Cheers erupted throughout the cafeteria. Men pumping their fists, slapping tables. Extra yard time was like gold in here. But Steven didn't cheer. He noticed something else. The guards were smiling. Not friendly smiles, knowing smiles. The kind that said they were expecting something. Something they wanted to see. Steven's instincts screamed warning. This wasn't a reward. This was a setup. Have you ever felt like something was wrong even when everything seemed fine? He stepped into the yard cautiously. The sun was bright overhead, too bright, almost blinding. And there, in the center of the yard, stood Vince, arms crossed, surrounded by his entire crew. Not just 3 or 4 men, all of them. Steven counted quickly, 9 men total. All positioned in a semicircle, blocking the exits, blocking the benches, blocking everything. The entire yard had formed a ring around them. 50, maybe 60 inmates, creating a human arena. A coliseum. No guard stepped forward. No whistles blew. No orders shouted. This was planned, coordinated, approved. The guards wanted this to happen. Steven stood alone in the center, calm, still watching. Vince stepped forward slowly, each footstep deliberate. Heavy boots on concrete. You made a mistake, Seagal. Vince said loudly. His voice carried across the entire yard. Steven's face remained expressionless. I defended myself. Nothing more. Vince's jaw clenched. You disrespected me. My people. My authority. Steven shook his head slightly. I disrespected no one. I just didn't bow. The crowd murmured. Some agreed with Steven, others with Vince. But everyone was watching. Vince cracked his knuckles. The sound echoed like gunshots. In here, if you don't bow, you break. His crew started moving, circling tighter, closing in like wolves. Steven's eyes tracked each man, measuring distances, calculating angles, reading body language. He'd been in situations like this before, outnumbered, surrounded, expected to lose. But numbers didn't always win fights. Skill did. Control did. Precision did. What would you do if you were surrounded with no way out? The crowd pressed closer, hungry for violence, hungry for blood. This was entertainment in a place where there was none. A spectacle, a show. But before anyone could move, before the first punch could be thrown, a voice cut through the noise like a knife. Vince. Everyone turned. An older inmate pushed through the circle, gray hair, weathered face, deep lines carved by decades behind bars. His name was Carter, 72 years old. He'd served 40 years in this prison, more time than anyone. He was respected by everyone, even Vince, especially Vince. What? Vince snapped, irritation clear in his voice. Carter looked at Steven, then back at Vince. His old eyes were serious, grave. You're making a mistake, son. Vince's face twisted with anger. How? He disrespected me in front of everyone? Carter stepped closer. His voice dropped lower. Because that man right there. He pointed at Steven. He didn't come here to fight. He didn't come here to prove anything. Carter paused, let his words sink in. But if you force him, if you push him into a corner, another pause, longer this time, you won't win. None of you will. Vince laughed, but it sounded hollow, forced. He's one guy, old man. There's 9 of us. Carter shook his head slowly, sadly, like a father watching his son make a terrible choice. I've been here 40 years, Vince. I've seen thousands of men come through these walls. He looked directly into Vince's eyes. Tough guys. Killers, gang leaders, enforcers. Carter's voice grew quieter, more intense, and I've seen men like him. He pointed at Steven again. Quiet, calm. Still. Patient. Carter's finger didn't waver. Those are the most dangerous men alive. The yard had gone completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Vince's jaw tightened. His pride was being challenged, in front of everyone. "Stay out of this, old man," he said coldly. Carter sighed, shook his head, and stepped back into the crowd. He'd said his piece, delivered his warning. The rest was up to them. Steven looked at Vince. "One last time, one last chance, you still have a choice," Steven said quietly. Vince's eyes flared with rage. "So do you." He lunged forward, fists raised, crew following behind, and the fight began. "Do you think Steven should strike first or wait for them to come?" Vince came in fast, faster than Steven expected for a man his size. A massive haymaker aimed directly at Steven's head. The kind of punch that could knock someone unconscious, the kind that had ended dozens of fights before. But Steven didn't panic. He'd seen punches like this 1,000 times. In dojos, in street fights, in real combat situations where hesitation meant death. He ducked under it smoothly, like water flowing beneath a bridge. Vince's fist sailed over his head, hitting nothing but air. Steven grabbed Vince's wrist mid-swing. His grip was iron, precise, unbreakable. He twisted. Not violently, not with brute force, with technique, with leverage, with 40 years of practiced skill. Vince's entire body followed his wrist. Basic physics, basic aikido. Control the joint, control the body. Steven swept Vince's legs. One smooth motion. 280 pounds of muscle hit the ground hard. The impact echoed across the yard like thunder. Dust scattered. Vince's eyes went wide with shock. He'd never been taken down that easily. Never. But there was no time to think about it, because his crew was already rushing in. 9 against 1. The odds they'd counted on. The numbers that should guarantee victory. But Steven didn't panic, didn't freeze, didn't try to run. He moved. First attacker came from the left. A wild swing. No technique. Just rage and muscle. Steven sidestepped. Redirected the man's momentum straight into the chain link fence. His face hit metal with a sickening crunch. He dropped like a stone. Second attacker, Cruz, the heavily tattooed one, came from the right. Faster, more controlled. He'd clearly been in fights before. But Steven was ready. He slipped inside Cruz's guard. Delivered a precise elbow strike to the ribs. Cruz's breath exploded out of his lungs. He doubled over, gasping. Steven moved past him without a second glance. Third attacker tried to grab him from behind. Big mistake. Steven felt the hands on his shoulders. He dropped his weight, twisted his hips, threw the man over his shoulder using his own grip against him. The man landed hard on his back, wind knocked out, stunned. Have you ever seen someone turn their opponent's strength into their weakness? The crowd was going insane, shouting, cheering. Some for Vince, some for Steven. But everyone was watching, mesmerized. This wasn't a brawl. This was a demonstration, a masterclass in combat. Fourth attacker came in with a knife, homemade shank, sharpened plastic, deadly in close quarters. The crowd gasped. This had just turned from a fight into an attempted murder. But Steven's eyes didn't widen. His breathing didn't quicken. He'd faced knives before. Many times, he waited, perfectly still. The attacker lunged, blade aimed at Steven's ribs. Steven moved at the last possible second. Redirected the knife hand, twisted the wrist, applied pressure to the joint. The shank clattered to the concrete. Steven followed with a palm strike to the man's solar plexus. The attacker crumpled, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Fifth attacker hesitated, seeing his friends fall, seeing the knife fail, seeing this old man move like smoke. But hesitation in a fight is death. Steven closed the distance. One strike to the shoulder, precise, controlled. The man's arm went numb instantly. Pressure point. He stumbled back, cradling his useless arm. Sixth and seventh came together, trying to overwhelm with numbers, both swinging wildly. Steven ducked under one punch, blocked the second with his forearm, swept the legs of the first, delivered a controlled strike to the second's knee. Not to break it, just to buckle it. Both men went down, groaning, defeated. Eighth attacker Thomas, the skinny computer guy, stood frozen, his hands raised, shaking. "I'm out, man. I'm out." He backed away quickly. Smart kid, that left one, a massive brute named Hector. 6'5", 300 pounds. He charged like a bull. No technique. Just raw power and fury. Steven waited, calm, centered. At the last second, he stepped aside, used Hector's own momentum, guided him face first into the concrete wall. The sound was brutal. Hector slumped to the ground, conscious but done. Finished. 90 seconds. That's all it took. 90 seconds to dismantle 9 men. Steven stood in the center of the yard, not even breathing hard, his gray jumpsuit barely wrinkled, his face completely calm, like he'd just finished a light workout. The yard was dead silent. No one moved, no one spoke. Even the guards stood frozen in shock. Vince struggled to his feet. His face was bruised, his lip bleeding. But worse than the physical damage, his pride was shattered. His authority demolished. His reputation destroyed, in front of everyone. You're not human," Vince muttered, blood dripping from his mouth. Steven looked at him. No anger in his eyes, no satisfaction. Just truth. "I'm just a man who trained his whole life." "Vince." He stepped closer. "You mistook silence for weakness, calm for fear, age for inability." Steven's voice was quiet but carried across the entire yard. "Respect isn't taken. It's earned." He paused. "And you just lost all of yours." Vince's crew remained on the ground, groaning, bleeding, broken. Not one of them moved to help their leader. They were done, finished. Defeated not just physically, but mentally, spiritually. Carter stepped forward from the crowd. His old face showed no surprise, only confirmation. "I told you," he said quietly to Vince. Steven turned and walked away. No celebration, no gloating, no raised fists or victory laps. Just calm, steady steps toward the corner of the yard. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. No one dared block his path. No one dared even look at him directly. A new king had just been crowned, without asking for the crown, without wanting it, but wearing it nonetheless. If you think real strength is staying calm under pressure, drop a like. The next morning, everything changed. The prison woke up different. The air felt different. The energy had shifted. Inmates who had mocked Steven just days earlier now nodded at him when he passed, gave him space at the cafeteria tables, showed respect in their eyes, not out of fear, out of understanding, out of recognition. They'd witnessed something rare, something real, true mastery, true discipline, true strength that didn't need to announce itself. Vince stayed in his cell, door closed, curtain drawn. His crew had scattered like leaves in the wind, some requesting transfers to other blocks, others keeping their heads down, pretending they'd never been part of his inner circle. The power structure that took 5 years to build crumbled in 90 seconds. Have you ever seen someone's entire world change in an instant? On day 12, Steven's lawyer arrived. Rebecca Ortiz walked into the visitation room with a smile on her face. The first genuine smile Steven had seen in nearly 2 weeks. "We did it," she said, sitting down across from him. "The charges dropped completely." Steven exhaled slowly. "How?" Rebecca pulled out a folder. "New evidence came to light. Security footage from your seminar that day, showing you never left the building when the alleged assault happened." She slid a document across the table. Marcus's financial records showing payments to the witnesses. Emails proving he fabricated everything. Steven nodded slowly. He got greedy. He got caught. Rebecca corrected. And now he's facing charges for fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. She leaned forward. "You're free to go, Steven." "Today?" Steven looked at her. Good. No celebration, no relief, just acceptance. Before he left, Carter found him in the hallway. The old man's weathered face showed something like respect, maybe even admiration. "You changed this place," Carter said quietly. Steven shook his head. "I didn't change anything. I just reminded people what respect looks like." Carter smiled slightly. Most men would have fought on day one. Proved themselves early. Made noise. Steven adjusted the small bag of belongings they'd given him. "I didn't need to prove anything. I needed to see who they were first. And," Carter asked, "they were scared. Angry, lost." Steven paused, looking for control in a place where they had none. Carter nodded slowly. "And Vince." Steven's expression softened slightly. Vince wasn't the real problem. The system was. He just played the role they gave him. The old man extended his hand. "You're a good man, Seagal." Steven shook it firmly. "So are you, Carter. Do you think understanding someone's pain makes their actions forgivable?" As Steven walked toward the exit, he passed Vince's cell. The door was partially open. Vince sat on his bunk. Head down, shoulders slumped. Steven stopped, stood there for a moment. "Vince." Vince looked up slowly. His face was still bruised, one eye swollen. But the real damage was deeper. "I didn't come here to humiliate you," Steven said quietly. Vince said nothing, just stared. "But I won't be disrespected either. Not by you. Not by anyone." Steven leaned against the bars, his voice calm, patient. "You have a choice now. Lead with respect or lose everything you built." Vince's jaw tightened. "Why are you telling me this?" Steven met his eyes. "Because I've been where you are. Angry. Trying to prove something to people who didn't matter." He straightened up. "It's a waste of time. Real power isn't in how many people fear you." Steven turned to leave. "It's in how you treat people when you don't have to." He walked away, left Vince sitting there, thinking, processing. For the first time in years, maybe the first time in his life. Steven stepped outside into the sunlight. The gates closed behind him with a heavy clang. Freedom. Cameras flashed immediately. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. "Steven, what happened in there?" Did you fight anyone? Are you pressing charges against Marcus Devane? How does it feel to be free? Steven raised one hand. The crowd quieted instantly. I learned something in there, he said. His voice was steady, clear, cameras recording every word. Respect isn't about how loud you are, how tough you look, how much power you have over others. He paused. Let the words settle. It's about how you treat people when no one's watching. When there's no camera, no audience. A reporter pushed forward. Did you regret going in? Steven smiled slightly, the first real smile in 2 weeks. No, I saw the truth. About them, about myself. And what's that truth? Steven's eyes grew serious again. That real strength is shown in restraint. Real character is shown in how you treat people you think have no power. Another reporter shouted. What about Vince Calloway? What about the men who attacked you? Steven shook his head. They were victims of a broken system, trapped in roles they thought they had to play. He walked toward the waiting car. I hope they find a better way. The door opened. Rebecca was waiting inside. Steven climbed in. The door closed, and he was gone, leaving behind a prison that would never be quite the same. Because sometimes one person standing firm, standing calm, standing true, can shift everything. Do you believe one person can really change an entire system?